squishy squares, the seed stitch border. This video will show you how to knit those first 6 rows of the blanket. The pattern says cast on the appropriate number of stitches, which I have done. I made a small sample, and now I do the instructions. Row 1, you are to knit 1, and then you are to knit 1, purl 1 until 1 stitch remains. Very easy for the beginner. So knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, purl 1, continue on down the line until 1 stitch remains. Just about at the end of row 1, finishing with knit, purl, 1 stitch remains, and you are to knit it. Now for a beginner, I highly recommend you use your row counter. It will help you not lose track of where you are at. I have finished row 1. Row 2. You are to SL1PW, which means slip 1 purlwise. What does that mean? Well, you pretend that you are going to purl, which means your yarn is in the front and you are approaching the stitch this way. So pretend you're going to purl, slip your needle in and just slide it off. That's it. You've slipped it as though you were to purl. Now you purl 1, knit 1 until 1 stitch remains. So I'm going to purl 1, knit 1, purl 1, knit 1. And if you've ever done the seed stitch before, you notice that you're doing opposite of what's down below. That is a knit stitch, and in fact I would purl into it. And then this is a purl stitch underneath and I knit into it. That's all seed stitch is you're doing opposite of what you see. So continue on down the row until 1 stitch remains. Just about at the end of row 2, and I'm continuing with the purl 1, knit 1 until 1 stitch remains, which is there, 1 stitch, and I am to purl it. Finished row 2, use your row marker, your row counter. Row 2. Row 3. Now you are to SL1KW, which means slip 1 knitwise. So this time you pretend you're going to knit, yarn goes to the back, and you're going to slip it as though you are knitting. So you pretend you're going to knit, but you don't actually knit it, and you just transfer it over. Okay, so I have now done that. Now the instructions say knit 1, purl 1 until 1 stitch remains. So again, you're doing the opposite of what's below, because that's a knit stitch, and now you're purling it. So just continue with your knit 1, purl 1 down the end of the row until 1 stitch remains. Just about at the end of row 3, finishing my final knit 1, purl 1, I have 1 stitch left, and row 3 says to knit it. Use your row counter, indicate you've done row 3. Helps keep you on track, unless you're an experienced knitter. Good for beginners though. Row 4. Row 4 says it is the same as row 2. That means you go back and you redo row 2. What does row 2 say? SL1PW, which means slip 1 purlwise. What does that mean? Yarn in the front, because you're going to purl, or you're going to pretend you're going to purl. You put your needle in as though you're going to purl, and you just slip it off. That's all you do. Then you purl 1, knit 1 until 1 stitch remains. So you're repeating what you have done before, and then you purl 1 at the end. I will go ahead and finish that. Getting to the end of row 4, which is in fact the same as row 2, last stitch left, I am to purl 1. Perfect. Use my row marker, row counter. I have finished row 4. Row 5. Row 5 instructions say same as row 3. Okay, so we do row 3, which is SL1KW, which means slip 1 stitch knitwise. So you're going to pretend you're knitting. Yarn goes to the back, you slip 1 knitwise, like that. Then you are to knit 1, purl 1 until the end of the, well, until there's 1 stitch left, and then you knit that last stitch. So you go ahead and finish your row 5. Just finished row 5. There we go. And the last one, row 6. And row 6 says the same as row 2. So you repeat what you did in row 2, which is SL1PW, which means slip one purlwise. You're pretending you're purling, so yarn is in the front. Bring it over and slip it. They're simple as that. And now you purl one, knit one until the end of until one stitch remains, and you are to purl that last stitch. I'm on row 6. I have one stitch remaining, which is the same as row 2. One stitch remaining is to purl one. And that is it. I finished row 6 of the seed stitch border, and that forms the bottom end edge of your border. Happy knitting!